Hello students, it's Dr. McClendon. This is the Essentials of Illinois School Finance, chapters 1 and 2. Just going to give you the notes to this, and let's look at spending power. So, in chapter 1, you'll talk about spending power of an individual school district is dependent on its property tax wealth. So, if you see neighborhoods with 4-car garages on the houses, swimming pools in the backyard, well-paved streets, the more money that a city, and more specifically a school district, can generate from its tangible property base, or the property taxes, the better. Cities with strong and aesthetic infrastructure, clean buildings, consistent property tax income, occupied dwellings are extremely important. No vacant buildings, commercial property, homes, skyscrapers, productive farmland, etc. Find that raising taxes is a rather stable endeavor. Neighborhoods without the above will struggle, which can lead to grossly underfunded schools. Let's look at property poor and property rich school districts. So property poor school districts can raise the tax rate on properties. They still have to get property tax money for the city and for schools. However, property rich school districts can raise the tax on properties, but they find it much easier to raise adequate funds due to property values. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Property poor school districts are more susceptible to continuous tax increases due to low values. The stress on increases can cause major uproars. Let's look at the state of Illinois. I'll get myself out of the way here. The state of Illinois. Illinois ranks near the bottom in equity funding. Realize that there's a difference between equity and equality. We'll get to that shortly. But if you look at Florida, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Kentucky, these are top-ranked equity-funded school states. But you'll see near the bottom ranked are Alaska, Vermont, Idaho, New Hampshire, and lo and behold, Illinois. Illinois brings in a lot of money in taxes, especially from those farmlands and from skyscrapers, commercial property, and from dwellings and buildings. But the way that the funding is disseminated becomes problematic, which we'll talk about later. If you look above here, it says equality means everyone has equal opportunity in finances. Equity means that different groups get different opportunities and finances based on needs. So, for instance, if 5 people are hungry, you give 5 slices of pizza to those hungry people. If 5 people have already eaten, they don't necessarily need those 5 slices of pizza. That's the difference between equality and equity. Just because you may want things to be equal, it doesn't always mean that those same things are equitable. Reserve funds. Please do not misuse reserve funds. A reserve fund is just that. It's for reserves. When a school district witnesses a recession or emergency causing district to operate with no adequacy, reserve funds can then be considered. Reserves should only be used for extreme emergencies and a rainy day. You can't just take a reserve fund and pay for a field trip. You can't take a reserve fund and just start building things. Reserve funds are for disaster. Reserve funds are for emergencies. Here's a tip down below. Reserve funds shouldn't be spent on lawsuits. No. Not on uniforms. No. Luxuries or other non-emergency items. This is why you have to be fiscally responsible in your school district. Chicago funds its schools in a manner different from all other Illinois school districts. I wonder why that is. Chicago has a very strong governor, very strong mayor. Chicago does things the way that it wants to do things. That's why it's called what? The Chicago Way, all right? Which dates back to some rather nefarious activity that took place many years ago in Chicago, Illinois. Let's look at this, though. Chicago, with all of its autonomy, mayoral autonomy, can exercise all 27 ways of funding schools and add its own to make 28. So here are the 28 different school finance systems in Illinois. You'll see 3 layers of 9, giving us 27. And then here's Chicago, which can use all 27 and make up some of its own rules. So we've got other counties, tax cap counties, Cook County. We have elementary, high school, and unit districts. Then we have special equalization, which we'll talk about later on in future chapters, alternate method, and the flat grant. And then here's Chicago. Here's a tip. See Figure 2 in Chapter 1 for details. Chicago's city laws can alter the cash flow and intake in schools. General Fund acquires taxes from state income taxes, sales taxes, other taxes, and fees. Why do we have to collect funds for the general fund? If there are funds deficient from the local property taxes, general funds from the above should make up the deficits. These come from the state. This comes from Springfield. This is not always adequate, but in a perfect world, which there is no perfect world, right? General funds should cover the gaps and bridge shortfalls. The budget is the district's financial plan. Let me go back. I want everyone to get this. The budget is the district's financial plan for 1 year, not for 3 or 5 years. You can plan for those years, but the district's financial plan for 1 year is the budget. Down below. Technically, this should be balanced by June 30th of each year. So let's look at what can become problematic here. When a school district's budget is not balanced, a 4-year deficit reduction plan must be completed. Some ask, why does it take a plan of 4 years? Why do we have to plan for 4 years if we had a deficit? Let's look at the tip. Whenever there is a shortfall, deficits are to be taken seriously. By planning a deficit reduction strategy, a time arc is created to prevent the deficit from happening again. This is a safety measure. It's saying that funds were mismanaged or you didn't raise enough in property taxes for the prior year. You ran out of money. You had a shortfall. You had a deficit, which means what? You don't just collect money and then, okay, throw it into the new year. Nope. Time for you to come up with a 4-year plan on how you're going to take funds in and how you're going to disseminate them. Let's look at use of funds. Flow through revenues, cash flow, and receipts go from one local agency to another. This is not to be commingled or mismanaged. Local revenues are comprised of, we talked about this earlier, property taxes, fees, and tuition payments. Unrestricted state revenues can be general state aid. Transportation funds are used for what? You have to ensure the transportation of children getting to schools. Do not use transportation funds for anything else. Liability insurance is covered under tort immunity. Only use tort immunity funds or legal or liability insurance for lawsuits. Do not use that money for anything else. Cash cushions are a provision for working cash, which you can have. Debt service funds are used for debt. Don't get it twisted. The educational fund is the largest fund for instruction-related items. Use educational fund for instruction-related items only. There are some school districts that try to fudge and hedge and create this systematic, creative form of financing where you try to make everything synonymous with the educational fund, or you try to make everything fit the educational fund. Well, it's all schools, so isn't everything the educational fund? No, it has to be related to instruction of children. That's the money used in the educational fund. Buildings have to have code required for safety, security, and fire prevention. Do not use safety, security, and fire prevention funds for anything other than that. Chapter 1 and 2. Please read both of those chapters. Be ready for the quiz. It's been great. It's Dr. McClendon. Out.